and shut off your videos, except for the participants. So, okay, great. More people will be joining as the evening progresses. So hello, everyone. We are live with Literally Alive. My name is Robert Diamanti, and I am with Catherine Hagopian-Berry tonight. And we both are thrilled to be hosting tonight's travel salon. Artists discuss how travel influences their art. Joining us tonight are Judy Allen Efstathiou, Agnes Bushell, Sharif Elmusa, and Gary Lawless. Tonight's Literally Alive is brought to you by Literal Books, Maine's independent publisher of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction books based in Portland, Maine. Visit literalbooks.com to purchase titles such as Kate Kennedy's Skin, Enough, Poems of Resistance and Protest, and Agnes Bushell's The Oracle Pool. I'll drop the URL right in the chat. And speaking of chat, Kate, how about going over some of the protocols with our audience?
Thank you, Robert. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literally Alive Travel Salon, where we get to close our eyes for a beautiful hour of time and imagine that we can travel the world again. Our panelists are going to open a whole world of beautiful places to us. And we'd like to record that for posterity. So I do want to remind everyone that you are being recorded and this program will be shared on the Literal Books website. So please just be aware of that before you choose to turn your cameras on or make a video comment. Our protocol here at Literally Alive is, unfortunately, to ask you to mute and shut off your cameras to help us preserve bandwidth. The good news is that especially in this travel salon, we are replacing our normal Q&A period with an open kind of group conversation as if we were all in some beautiful airport together. So you will be invited in the last 15 minutes of the program to turn your cameras on and unmute and discuss and hopefully have some wonderful thoughts and responses to share. Meanwhile, the comment feature, which is located on the bottom of your Zoom screen, is a chance to engage as the conversation occurs in real time. You can feel free to put any comments, questions, responses in the audience. Robert and I will be engaging you in the chat and sharing aspects of the chat with our panelists as we go forward. So, without further ado, Robert, I have a travel question for you.
For me?
For you.
Okay.
What our audience may not know is that you are actually an amazingly accomplished photographer and travel photographer. You've taken tremendous photographs of all sorts of fascinating places. And I wanted to ask you, what is the place that you have photographed or that you are longing to photograph, which is in your mind tonight as we think about it?
Everywhere. Like all of us, I'm longing to go someplace. Why don't we start with the photograph that was used to promote tonight's event. That was, so if you saw the email or if you picked up the URL from the Literally Alive page, you saw what looked like some sort of a ruined column. And that was actually from the Citadel in Amman, Jordan, of all places. That was the last place I traveled before lockdown. So that's the ruins of the Temple of Hercules in Amman, Jordan. So there you have it. And
I have a haiku about it.
Oh, that would be wonderful if you could read it.
If I can remember it, I have a haiku about this Temple of Hercules.
It was an amazing place, and I happened to be there. You can see the light. I happened to be there at sunset, and of course, sunset in in Amman, Jordan. All of the calls for prayer all around the city. You're on top of this mount, being surrounded by all of the calls to prayer. It was positively beautiful and dizzying, and it was one of the most amazing experiences I remember. Kate, thank you for allowing me to remember that. I think this is a perfect segue into tonight's panel. So we're going to begin with Judy Allen Efstathiou. Judy, welcome. Yeah. You have a wonderful relationship with Greece. Tell us a little about yourself and your art.
Yeah, Well, I'm a visual artist. I do printmaking and some sculpture. And I think my name kind of describes what I do. I spend 6 months of the year in the United States, in Portland, and use the name Allen rather than Efstathiou, because Efstathiou is difficult here. And then I live in Athens, Greece, the other part of the year where Allen is difficult, but Efstathiou is very easy. I have these kind of split personality. And then, so my, definitely, and I've been traveling back. I've been doing this 6 months since 2000. So for 20 years, I've been doing this. Before that, I lived all the time in Greece and would just come back to Maine to visit my mother, who's from Maine. So my traveling is almost all commuting back and forth to Greece. However, Greece, of course, is very close to a lot of very interesting places. So I have traveled a lot, like in Turkey and North Africa and Europe, and very little in the United States, I have to say, you know, aside from once to the Grand Canyon. I think my work is definitely influenced by this back and forth. Sometimes in just practical ways, like I work a lot on very thin Asian paper because I can roll it up in a mailing tube and take it with me. I also travel within Greece back and forth. I have a house on the island and a house in Athens, so I'm back and forth between Athens. So I'm always back and forth. I have a studio on the island, I have a studio in Athens, I have a studio in Portland. So I'm just traveling all the time. So the idea of tourism actually doesn't really appeal to me because I spend so much time traveling. I can't imagine that anyone would ever take a cruise because the ship is only to get from one place to another. But certainly, I think these two cultures are really different. I mean, Maine and Greece are super different. They look similar, you know, the landscape, but they're really, really different. And I have noticed the last artist statement I wrote, I actually wrote it in two parts: my Maine life and my life in Greece. So in Greece, I work a lot on paper. I do drawings of plants. Here's a cyanotype I did from some plant drawings. I'm in a show right now that's just up for a few more days at Cove Street Art, cyanotype show, where it's all based on these plants that I've been recording the wildflowers on the island of Kea for over 10 years on one particular path. And then I make different things from those. So that's there. And then, but here I do cover. This is
yeah.
This is cover. I won a commission from the Maine, from the state of Maine, to use the copper that came off the dome of the State House. And I made some. So there are 3 panels in the State House, and they also partly paid me in copper because they were, you know, they had to get rid of all this copper and justify where it went. So I happily took a lot of the copper because it's so beautiful. I love copper. I'm a printmaker, so I work with copper. Etching is these I just etch straight through as if it's an etching. So so I got this copper, which has like now supported me for 4 years with other commissions. So I always just go in and just say to what Percent for Art buildings, wouldn't you like to have some copper from the State House? Yeah, that's one in Belfast. That was a tree commission I did of 5 panels called Under the Branches, where you sit under the branches. So that was a design for one of the branches that went on a literal book. So we're talking about you doing more trees for the next north by northeast. So that's the 2 things. I mean, copper does not fit in suitcases. These are very big panels. You can see one behind me, one of the trees. So I do the copper when I'm here. and do some printing. And then I mostly work on paper in Greece. Yeah, that was an etching that I did in Greece of a wreath that was we used in another book. So I really work with copper a lot as an etcher for years. I teach printmaking, taught at USM, and now I'm not teaching because I don't go out of the house, but so I teach printmaking, and that's so printmaking is sort of the basis of what I do. But
thank you, Judy. That's very helpful. Kate, would you like to introduce our next panelist?
Oh my goodness, do I get Agnes? Agnes Bushell is an astoundingly accomplished author. I'm actually doing this without your bio, which I never got, so feel free to hop in. 12, 13 books at this point?
13, yeah, 13.
Okay, I did it right. The most recent of which is the amazing Oracle Pool, which is, quite frankly, my absolute favorite. She is also a co-owner of Literal Books, an independent publishing house in Portland. She has taught, mentored, and created amazing space for words throughout her entire life. And I'm honored to be able to introduce her. Agnes Bushell.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate. So I don't have to say anything more. I have, however, decided that instead of talking about my relationship to travel, which Judy did really well, and I'm sure that Gary and Sharif will do as well, but my relationship to travel is basically that I like to adventure. And so what I decided to do was to read a small passage from the Oracle Pool, which is the latest book that I've published. And this is a scene in which the three major characters are planning to go on the overland trip to India. It's 1970. This is also called the Hippie Trail. And they're making their plans. And I think that of the three characters, what I've done is I've taken the three reasons that I travel and divided them into three. And each one of these characters speaks about each one of those reasons for travel. So I'll just read this. For the next 2 years, they went about their lives, and a good part of their lives was devoted to planning their journey to India. Being a slightly obsessive person, Grace decided she would learn everything she could about the countries they would be traveling in, and the important sights to see along the way, the languages they might expect to hear, the food they might expect to eat, the types of vehicles they might use, precise distances between major cities, and amounts of time they might expect to take from one place to another. All this, or most of it, was of little concern to either Artemis or Sabina, who both had different interests entirely. Sabina wanted to hunt for living practitioners of ancient religions hidden away in the mountains of Bactra or the Swat Valley, collect native-made textiles and pottery, and photograph temples and stupas and other ruins. Artemis wanted to see the country and meet people and talk to them. In what languages he might accomplish this was always a question. And get high and just not be in America for a while. Just not be in the fucked up military-industrial complex. Just leave the horror behind and be somewhere else. So that's my story about.
Thank you so much, Agnes. Sharif, thank you for joining. What a nice coincidence that you wrote a haiku about the Citadel, about the Temple of Hercules. I should have told you earlier. You could have shared that. Tell us more about yourself and please share some of your work. Oh, you're muted.
Maybe. Okay, I don't understand why, but in any case, okay, I am a scholar a poet, and I've translated many poems from Arabic. I don't call myself a translator. And I also have written numerous articles and essays in various journals and international periodicals and newspapers, especially in Egypt and in India. I'm a naturalized American citizen, so I immigrated to that industrial, military industrial complex. At the time probably they were leaving. But I'm Palestinian by birth. So I'm kind of like what you might say, I'm from here and I'm from there. And I have been shuttling back and forth between here and between the Middle East for all my time. And I spent a lot of time in the Middle East and a lot of time here. I traveled to many cities in Europe. And I went as far as Beijing and Seoul too. Mostly these were academic conferences really that I went to, but they provided the opportunity for travel. My poems are largely from a few places in the Middle East and from the US, basically. I have to be in a place for a long time to feel like I can write about the the place, or as Rilke said, kind of like, don't write about anything until you feel it trusts you, that thing or that person or that place. I think of my way of looking at it like I have, being from two places, I have a double gaze. The one of I am from here and the one I am from there. So I decided to read this short poem. If we have time, I mean, I can wait later, but from Cairo. It's titled Nocturnal Window. And it was inspired by a poem from the Greek anthology by Kenneth Rexroth, who himself was quite a mobile poet. Just in case, people have forgotten the ancient Egyptian god, there is one god here that comes in the poem, Thoth, who was the god of the moon and of learning, among other things. So I read the poem. I tried to print it, but tonight, just before we started, the printer, of course, bought, so as usual. So it's called Nocturnal Window. A bright 3/4 moon beams in the eastern sky over 3 million households. Is it the same moon that the wise thought fixed? This one looks like it doesn't wish to be alone, would land in the lap of a satellite dish any moment. The neighbor's dog basks in a long, polished howl. The train, as if hauling the vast walls of the city, blows a grave, far-reaching whistle. But the windows of many apartments have already drawn their curtains. The fountain in the square has gone to sleep. The flowers of the Peruvian jacaranda are completely still in the new home. No wind is blowing. The mind moves the world as power moves the ceiling fan. The poem is the breeze. Thank you.
Yes, beautiful.
I give the floor to someone else. Enough for here.
Oh gosh, it's me.
Hey,
I get to
would you like to
follow
introduce
that, and I'm
Harry?
like crying. was so lovely and so vivid,
Yes.
and made the poem move the fan tonight. So it is my distinct honor to be able to pass the screen to Gary Lawless. Gary, were you going to do your own bio, or should I biographize?
You can make it up.
You and your glory. I would never make it up.
Make it up. Just say what you want.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I will take you on because I got lucky enough to introduce two people who I'm tremendous fans of. Gary Lawless sat at the feet of another Gary Snyder and felt the world and his voice open beneath him. And he has written more books of poetry than I have time to mention, but his latest project is a tremendous, deep connection with the Stones of Venice, entitled The Stones of Venice, where he has been meditating foundationally through metaphors primarily of rock and mineral that somehow expand into poems as glorious and universal as the aurora behind him. Should I go on, or are you going to?
No, you can do it. Yeah, I don't. You get. I like it. I'm not just stoned here, so it's I've been thinking about my travel off this continent. I've tried to leave this continent every year for the last 20 years, and this year I haven't been able to leave the continent. Beth and I were supposed to spend 6 weeks in Venice this year at a foundation there. We had a free apartment, but we couldn't go. So this is the first year we haven't left in a long time. Most of my travel in the last 20 years off the continent had to do with poetry. So residencies or readings or festivals. And I was thinking of some of the places, like in Slovenia, I read in a cave 200 feet below the surface of the earth. And in Naples, I read in a tattoo bar. And I've had all these wonderful, and I had a month-long residency in Sitka, Alaska, and a month-long residency in Venice, like you said, and a summer-long residency in Labrador. But I just thought I would read this. This is just a poem from, I was artist in residence for Isle Royale National Park. And Isle Royale is an island in Lake Superior, 45-mile-long island. The summer I was there, there were 2,200 moose and about 30 wolves and maybe 100 people, maybe. So we were way outnumbered by the mammals. So this is from there. Nothing but moose trails in the mist. Today's fog and wind, trees against sky. I want to disappear into cloud, wander my way to sunlight, follow the moose down secret trails in the woods to reach the places where the wolves rest upon the ridges within us, where the heart wanders wild. Dove il cuore vaga selvatico. That's what I want to do. I want to go where the heart wanders wild and be in those places. So it has taken me to, and the last big trip we made, we went to Greece and we traveled with His All Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew and went to Athens and then out to Spetses and Hydra with him. And when you travel with the Patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church and you have a long white beard, like I do, you are in, believe me, and you are in. And we traveled with him to the Prince's Islands off Istanbul, or as they call it, Constantinople as well. So traveling with an old guy with a long white beard, you do it with the Greek Orthodox, it's a good way to travel. That's a tip, a travel tip. So thanks, Kate. There's dead silence now. I killed it.
No, I have a question. Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. It seems that we're all related to the Mediterranean. Isn't that odd?
Mm.
I mean, what we've been talking about is the Mediterranean. Let me just point out that there's a blue-footed booby behind me. I've been to the Galapagos, which is not the Mediterranean. But that's about as far away from the Mediterranean that I've traveled. It's very odd that we seem to have that connection.
Well, I think it's a question that you raised, Agnes, which is really what I was going to come back to. And I popped in the chat and nobody's taken me up on it. Is, you know, you've raised these sort of three really interesting approaches to travel through your three different characters. Do you want to learn everything there is to learn? And I've been guilty of that, you know. My guidebooks, had guidebook babies, had scholarly monographs. Do you want some sort of authentic, revelatory, cultural, immersive experience, or do you just want something new? And I'd love to hear what others on the panel have to say to that. You know, how are they engaging with those ideas? What are you looking for when you travel?
That's a very good question. I've already answered it.
You've answered it. You're off the hook.
Well, I mean, I haven't really thought much about, you know, why I travel, because many times it just happens that I travel. You know, as I said, many times I went to conferences, but I went also like to Italy and to Scotland and to, you know, England for other reasons. I guess, you know, you want to see the world, as it were. One of my interesting experiences was actually in Scotland. I always wanted to go to Scotland because when we were young, in the ninth grade, we, in addition to memorizing Arabic poems, we also had to memorize English poems. And of course, the latest poems were the 19th century. We didn't do anything from the 20th century. So you had William Wordsworth, etc. And there was one poem by Robert Burns, and it was about Scotland. And here I am, you know, grew up near Jericho, where it is really flat land. And we used to kind of carry our books and go out, you know, and just memorize while you are out, not at home, because you have to, you know, do it loud and everything. So here I'm in this flat land, memorizing Bobby Burns. Wherever I wander, wherever I rove, the hills of the highlands, forever I love. You know, it stayed in my mind. I wanted to see, you know, these hills. And indeed, you know, one day I found myself there with Judith, who, you know, became my wife. We were together. And I ended up actually writing a poem about it. It's a long poem and it's one paragraph, but it's kind of, you know, like here I am, you know. So these are the highlands, heather and this and that and that. It's called, the poem is called Aren't We All Brothers? Because I am a timid guy, you know, especially when it comes to driving, and, you know, I'm not really adventurous in that sense. And Judith had to drive. And she said she could drive on the left. You know, I mean, how can you drive on the left, right? I mean, it was really difficult. So in any case, so at one point we fell into a ditch, you know, and this man, you know, suddenly this young boy comes in and says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Look, we are in the ditch," you know. And his father came with his tractor, and you know, he pulled us out from the ditch, and he, you know, kind of, it was odd because do you want to pay him for the effort or not? So we said, "Could we compensate you?" And he looked at us and said, "Aren't we all brothers?" You know. So the poem is called this. Actually, it is someone read it from you know, at the main public library. It's recorded. I can send you the recording of the poem. But then what is interesting is, of course, how other people receive the poem. You know, what did it mean to the person who read the poem? It's not what it meant to be, but it was, you know, an opening kind of to the mind, how other, you know, what is important is not like what we just think, but what the reader think, or like the viewer of the painting thinks of everyone brings it to it their own experience, I suppose. But as I said, I don't really have any, I'm not like, don't have wanderlust, although I have been wandering all my life. But
I think one of the really wonderful things about traveling is that you find out that there are people all over the world who will help you out, when you get a ditch or, so yeah, we are that sense of brotherhood that you find that you get used to in your own neighborhood because you take it for granted. But when you're out traveling and you're in a foreign country, you don't speak the language, you don't know where you are, it's that wonderful feeling that people will help you. And that's another good reason to travel. It reasserts or reaffirms that sense of humanity, maybe.
I think it's.
I was going to say that I also, I never plan trips. I just travel because something comes up. I have an exhibition somewhere and I have to go there. So I never really like to plan. But once I get someplace, then I am completely, I want to see everything and I'd like try to find things. But it's just by chance where I end up going because I have an exhibition there, or for a while I was working for a conference where we would go, India and all these other places. And so I was really happy to be there. But I can't actually plan trips. I just like things to happen, and fortunately, actually Athens is one of those places that things just kind of fortuitously happen. You end up traveling one place or another or close by, so I guess I don't like that idea of like tourism, like you decide you're going to go somewhere and then research it forever and then go there. I sort of just like to discover once I'm in a place. I draw a lot when I go places, so I see things through drawing. I see places, slows me down. And,
Judy, I have a question for you. When you draw in places, do people come to you? Do you draw people to you because you're drawing? Do they come and ask you questions? Is that how you meet people?
They do. It is whenever you draw, you open yourself up to people. Especially in Greece and certain countries where people kind of don't have much of a sense of boundaries anyway. It does. It's a really good way that people come and look over, especially kids, come and look over your shoulder or start conversations. I actually taught for years a study abroad program in Athens, and it was a cultural study art class, and what I did was take them all over the city into like the loveliest parts of the city, and we would sit and draw, and people would come to us like magnets. So the kids were like that's how they interacted. I didn't say you have to go and interact with these people. It just happened because we were drawing. And I think when you draw, you also slow down. So you look at one thing that comes. So instead of trying to take in everything, you just focus in on one thing and you learn the place by that one thing and what happens while you're drawing it.
Mm-hmm.
Great way.
I know, because meeting people when you travel is sometimes hard. It's really nice to have something that brings people to you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it raises an interesting question about process. When you're an artist and you're experiencing a foreign place, there is a moment where you have to sit down in that place and take the photograph or draw the picture. But as a writer, you can either be writing or drafting in the moment, or you can do it reflectively. And I'm curious about the writers on the panel. When you decide to write about a setting, how do you go about doing that? Do you do it like right then, take out your Moleskine, or do you wait?
Sarah, you should answer this question.
I should?
Yes.
I'll answer it. I'll start anyway. When I travel, I take lots of notes. I take a little pocket. Allen Ginsberg told me to always carry a little pocket notebook and a pen. and just take notes all the time. And it's really good. And so I have these stacks of little notebooks from all my different trips. But what I'm doing usually is I'm really interested in, I believe that every place is sacred, but that people haven't yet realized what's sacred about that particular place. So I want to find out why these places are considered sacred, and so I want to learn about the rocks, and I want to know about the trees and the plants and the people and the stories. So I'm looking around, and I do a lot of research after I've been to a place. I'll read a lot about it to learn more and try to familiarize myself with the stories of that place, not necessarily the human stories. I mean, for 2 years, I've been reading about marble and granite and learning about those stories, starting with Venice, but working my way out. And now I'm trying to write about the stone's point of view about the planet, which is a much longer narrative. We're not even around for one vowel of a stone's story. They speak really slowly. So I'm just, when I travel, I take lots of notes, and occasionally there's a whole poem that comes at once. And then there are other poems that come 10 years later, looking back in journals, or looking at, like with Robert, we're looking at a photograph, and all of a sudden there are words. There's images are conjured by other images. I like conjuring. I like things being conjured. So, and I don't want to be with tour groups and tour boats, and I'd like to be with local people, even though I stand out because I'm not a local person, but I like to see what they're seeing and hear what they're hearing, and think about the place the way they think about it, not the way Rick Steves tells me to think about it necessarily. Which is why I like Agnes's books. Though her characters talk about those places, they're wonderful. So anyway.
Yeah, I think, when I look back usually at many of my poems, I find them what you might call poetry of place, poems of place, because part of maybe being kind of this immigrant exile, or whatever you want to call it, is you really begin to get attached to places, which kind of is the opposite of kind of traveling and just wanting to go on, because you're always afraid that you will lose that place, you will lose that tree, you will lose that bus station even, or you will lose that neighbor, or and then you become kind of more of a poet of place. And place is not, it is of course the natural setting, the landscape, the shape, the houses, but it's also places are the people in them, the places get enacted all the time. I mean, like if you say a university, now when we are all teaching like on Zoom, you go to a campus, this is not a university, it is there, right? It has to be kind of the routines that take place in the university every day. The place is an assembly of all sorts of things. And in order to write about it, I feel like one has to get really the feel of place. You have to get to understand. I have a new manuscript that I have been, I've just finished, and in it at the beginning I quote an Apache man who talks to an anthropologist. His name is Kenneth Basso, and the name of the book is called Wisdom Sits in Places. And the Apache man by the name of Dudley tells him, you also must drink from places. You must think what happened long time ago in places. You must do this, you must do, and keep thinking and thinking and thinking about it. And this way, one of the results is that you become wise. At least, you become wise about the place. And that is when you write. Now, as Gary said, you may write it like right in the place, but like the Scottish poem I wrote, actually, I was in Cairo one afternoon sitting there, and this whole thing comes in, and I just sat and wrote it in one sentence. 2 pages, which is not normal for me. Yeah, it's hard. Sometimes, you take notes, you have you struggle, and sometimes it just doesn't work, right? And you come back, or you leave it, or there is really no, some people say I sit like every day and I write a poem. I can't do that. I wish I could, but I can't.
Agnes, do you want to weigh in on process?
I've been thinking about it, actually, as everyone has been talking. I mean, this is just off the top of my head because I really haven't given it a whole lot of thought, but I think what happens with me is I go to a place, kind of adventuring, not planning to write about it, just planning to have fun. And then I get hooked by something about that place, and suddenly I begin to see characters there. And maybe I take some notes, but I always have to go back. It's like I have to be inspired by the place. I have to go home. I have to think about it. I have to start writing, and then I have to go back. So I said a book in Istanbul, I have to go back 3 or 4 times. But the thing is, it's really pretty great to have that excuse to go back to a place like Istanbul, right? I say, I have to go to Istanbul. I'm writing a book. I need to know where that park bench is. I need to know if there's a tree here. I have to go down that street again. It's fabulous. I recommend it, really. And I think I've done that with all of my books. It's like a very good excuse. I was writing a book about Alexander the Great once, and I had to go to Macedonia. I had to go to all of the places where he lived. And then I had to, it's sort of, so actually, on one level, all of this is just an excuse for me to travel and justify my traveling by saying I'm writing a book about it. If I wasn't a writer, I'd have to be a bank robber or something and have to go places staking out robbery joints, because it really gives traveling a kind of contour for me. It gives it a shape. It's like, I'm going for a reason. I need to do this kind of research. And it's always very petty. It's like, seriously, is there a park bench here? I want to put my character there. Can I do that? But it's kind of a wonderful excuse to get on a plane, which I would do tomorrow if I could.
Agnes, you did write a book about a bank robber.
I did, indeed.
You did.
He was right here in Portland. I didn't.
Right here in Maine.
Where would you go if you could get on the plane tomorrow?
Who, me?
Anybody. Where would you go? The flight's leaving. Where would you go?
Well, I'd have to go to California to see my baby. But if it wasn't to California to see my babies, I would actually go anywhere. Get out of Dodge.
Anyone else? Where would you go?
I would go to Aspen. I will go to, as soon as I get my second vaccine, I'm out of here to Aspen. Not too close.
I would go, if I could go anywhere at this point, I would go to the northern island of Japan, to the Ainu traditional homelands in northern Japan, where I've always wanted to go. And I have a tattoo by an original Ainu artist on my arm, and I haven't gotten there yet, and probably won't at this point. But but when Agnes was talking, I was thinking, when we went to the racetrack in Istanbul, Constantinople, and we saw the serpent sculpture that's there in the racetrack.
Oh.
Then we had to go to Delphi because it was originally from Delphi, and this base of that sculpture is still in Delphi. So we had to follow the stones, And then in Istanbul, there's just a left foot of a sculpture on a front wall. And when you go to San Marco in Venice, the 2 guys, the Fourth Crusade, stole that sculpture, but they left the left foot behind. So the foot is in Istanbul, but the rest of the guy's body is on the door, like next to the door to the Treasury on St. Mark's in Venice. So when you start following the stones, you have to go all these places. You know, I had to go to Paros to see where the Venus de Milo came from. You know, just
It is a great excuse, isn't it?
As I was working on the manuscript, I was thinking of titles, and each title somehow got some aspect of place or how I thought about place. But one of the titles I had was, just playing with things. I said, pretensions of an otherwise mindful guest. Do you feel like sometimes when here you are in another city, I'm in Cairo or I'm in England, and then I'm writing this poem about it, like as if I really know. Do you feel like really, who am I, really? How can I even, am I qualified? Have I understood the place? Have I gotten into it? Can I think of it as a native or like am I really saying really great things about it, or am I really just pretending? And I thought maybe yeah,
Yeah, I don't worry about that, but I could see you might. I wonder what other people that are listening to us have to say about this.
I want to respond to Sharif though. If I go to Portland to do poetry work with the Somali community, I stand out as someone who is from the outside. That, I mean, you don't have to leave the state to go into communities. When I work with folks, the homeless community at Preble Street, I mean, there are all these communities right here that it's like traveling to somewhere else, because there are all sorts of different things happening. And in order to be good citizens, we ought to know how to live in their communities. We don't know how to live in moose community or skunk community, or dragonfly community. We don't know how to behave in each other's communities properly. So it's always fun to learn, to try to learn. Like I'm trying to teach Sharif to be a Maine nature poet, right, Sharif? So
Well, actually, I was thinking about that because, one time Gary organized what he called poetry walks. And he took us to this park. And after we finished, he said, try to write poems, about a poem about this. And I kind of, in the old days, poets used to be commissioned like artists sometimes to write poems. So I felt like I was commissioned, to write it. And so I wrote it. And I think, it is a pretty good poem. It was published and everything. But do I really, am I comfortable with, do I, what I said about that place? I've just been there once, and I wrote about it. But was I being pretentious or not? That's how I, kind of, I wrote it and everything and enjoyed writing it and had fun, with it. But still, you feel like, maybe different. I mean, so.
I have actually a question for everybody about travel that I was thinking about. I always had this idea, or I always would say that I wanted to go to the Grand Canyon while I could still walk to the bottom. But I never really intended to go there or expected that I would get there, especially since I happen to be living in Greece, it was like really far away. And even when I came back, I would say I had this idea. This was my big trip in the States. Since I don't travel in the States, that I wanted to go to the Grand, but I didn't really imagine that I would ever go. It was just an idea, like an imagined place. And then my husband got so sick of me saying that he took me there one year and I walked to the bottom and back. And so I don't have that anymore. He took that away from me. So I haven't found another place that I want to be the place that I aspire to go to, that I never have any intention of actually going to, or it's just more this idea. maybe as an American living outside the States for so long, I had this idea of the United States, the biggest idea of the trip. Of course, I also think that I would travel coast to coast by car, but you know, you have to be 20 years old to do that. But so I had that big idea, and now it's gone. Does anyone else have that? Like some place that that's just an idea about travel? You sort of, I don't know. Or that you keep saying that
there is a poem I can't remember. It's the idea of Samarkand. It's called. I mean, the woman, you know, the poet is a female, and she talks about kind of, you know, I want to go there, but she finds eventually that it is the idea of Samarkand that she really wants to have. Yeah. So
you all have an idea of a place.
yeah.
It's more important than actually the place, or it's the important thing is the idea. So the important thing to me was this idea of going to the Grand Canyon, walking about, and it sort of represented the United States to me.
Did it live up to the? Did it live up to the billing?
Wonderful, and I went in the winter, and there were no people there, and it would snow, so I walked down in the snow, and then when you get down further, it warms up. You go through all these climates. It was actually fantastic. So I was really glad that I did actually go, and it was different. It was very different than what I expected. It was probably maybe, well, it was just an idea, so I never knew what I expected, but it was wonderful.
Has anyone gone? So, has anyone gone to Morocco?
Yes.
Because because this is where I would, you know, I keep saying this is the place that I want to go to if I don't go anywhere else. I wrote this very long poem about, I don't know if you're familiar with Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta was a 14th century traveler who actually traveled much more than Marco Polo, and he had recorded his journey, and he was from Tangier, and I followed, you know, in the poem his leaving to his coming back to Tangier, and I thought I want to go and see Tangier at least, and you know, but if anyone, you know, have you been to Tangier? Yeah.
If I could just jump in here, is that possible?
Yes.
So I am racking my brain to try to remember what essayist it is. It's someone like Leslie Jamison or Maggie Nelson, something like that. And she talks about my Venice. And Venice is someplace she'd never been. And it is this sparkling, amazing, and all these things that she's projecting upon it becomes like the longed for land. Now, I don't know if she ever got there. I don't think she was ever actually making plans to go there, but she's just talking about that having my Venice gives her sort of like this meaning in life that may or may not ever be realized, and this sparkling thing off in the distance that probably is better for her concerns to be left off in the distance. So as you're talking about this, I'm remembering that this whole longing for something that in a lot of ways in this world is very accessible, but also for her is sort of inaccessible and perhaps never to be accessible. So my Venice is something, I will look up the, because I have it in an essay of mine about Waiting for Barbados. So I will look up the reference and I will send it to Agnes and she can distribute it because it's quite good. It's a whole essay about my Venice that she's never been to.
Oh, Linda, that was awesome. Thank you. Does anyone else have a Venice or a Grand Canyon or Morocco?
I have a Venice right behind my head in my picture there. There's Venice right there.
Yeah, what I feel about these magical places that you imagine, and love to get to, and what I hate is reading about them in advance, or looking at guidebooks in advance, or looking online and finding out information about them in advance. I like to go to a place and have no idea what it's going to be like, and just go and get lost if I need to. Or when we took a trip to the Peloponnese, I guess it was about 20 years ago now, and we just rented a car and we drove around the Peloponnese, and we didn't have any reservations, and we didn't know where we were going to stay. It was wonderful. It was like this wonderful adventure. It was almost like a throwback to a time when there was no advanced bookings. I hate advanced bookings. It's just me.
Yeah, like in the old days in Greece, we would get on a boat to go to an island, and I don't know, the wind would come up and we'd end up on another island, and it was like, oh, okay, you know, that's cool.
No plans, right?
Yeah.
Good. My mother, was very superstitious, and I acquired this from her. You worry if you say, I'm going to do all of this and this and that, and then something will come and just, ruin the whole plan. So I'm not high on planning either.
I'd like to know if anybody else in the audience has a question for a panel member, or for the entire panel. So feel free to unmute yourself at this point. And if not, Kate, you asked me a question. I'm going to volley a question at you. And no one's talked about the most important part of travel, which is the airport. And I find airports wonderful places. A lot of people hate them. But the minute I step into the airport, I go to my special place. It's a great place to watch people. Have you brought your kids yet to airports? Have you done that people watching thing?
Oh yeah, we like to travel. Well, we liked to travel. So they've always been traveling. My parents are North Carolinians now. They weren't always. So they have been on planes forever because that's the only way we can go. And we've branched out as far as Arizona in the continental United States, but we were trying for Europe for all of this. And now I don't know if that's going to happen ever, or at least in a year or two. One of the things that I was thinking of during this whole thing is the experience that constantly happens to me when I travel is I'll hear about a place and I'll be like, oh, that's so hyped up. That's ridiculous. Venice. Oh, everybody talks about Venice. Oh, everybody talks about Crete. It's not going to be. It's just not going to be. And then I get there and it's ridiculously magical. Like sometimes in these places that I've talked myself out of, and I'm like, it's too overdone. It's too touristy. Nothing will ever shine through. It's like falling in love. All of a sudden, I'm like, I can't believe it. I love you. How did that happen? I thought you weren't the one for me. And I was wondering if anyone, the panelists, the audience, had a place that was a delightful surprise that you visited.
Maybe I'll answer the first question about airports. Actually, I did write a poem in my book, Flawed Landscape. It's called Transit at Charles de Gaulle Airport. Yeah, which really I didn't like very much. But I had been going, for 10 years back and forth from Cairo, many times a year, between Washington and Cairo. I was a frequent flyer on Air France. And, it just was really a miserable place. It used to be, I think at the end they kind of improved it some, but I won't read you the poem, it's a long poem, but if you want to, if there is time, I can read it.
I'll just jump in about airports. I'm Judith. I'm Sharif's wife, actually. And I'm just going to say that in that 10-year period when Sharif was coming and going from Cairo, I was mostly in Washington. And so I was the one who would pick him up at the airport. And I got into going early because I loved international arrivals.
Yeah.
It is the most wonderful place. People are greeting each other, the people they haven't seen in a long time, or they, I've never seen so much happiness as in international arrivals. And I was usually pretty happy myself, so it was all good. Yeah.
I'll just add that Elaine De Botton, who is a British writer and philosopher, he has a book called A Week at the Airport, and he was granted a residency at Heathrow. And he got the food, the food vouchers, and they put him up in the hotel there. Really, it is a fabulous book. A week in the airport, Elaine De Botton.
That sounds really wonderful. I'm going to look into that. Daniel's iPad, is that Daniel and Bonnie? They also expressed the desire to hear Sharif's poem about Charles de Gaulle. I wish you could read an excerpt. We're running out of time, but I think
okay, yeah,
worthwhile.
Okay. Transit at Charles de Gaulle Airport. How could luminous Paris birth such a loveless airport? We whose destination is the third world are bused to Terminal 2E for 45 minutes, flight time to Milan. The mutant vehicle, like French theorists, meanders incomprehensibly on a twisted road, sharp turns, sudden stops, no transitions between the curves, meanders among bleak post structures, aerodynamic forms, as if meant as decoys for the missiles of the former Soviet Union. De Gaulle would have circumvented all like an American with a shortcut. I scan faces from the 5 continents, a disparate collection of creatures, looking lost, as I always imagined the dead would be on the first day of resurrection. No one knows anyone else, yet somehow, since they are going somewhere, I am immortal, cussing the fierce gatekeepers, cussing the long march to the gates. My rage is as vast as Gaul. Ah, to be flown to my desert, duty free. So I felt that Charles de Gaulle.
Wonderful.
Well, what a wonderful end note. We could go on if you'd like to, but it is 8 o'clock, and I'm sure we all have supper to get to, and this has been an amazing night. Panelists, do you have anything else you'd like to say in closing?
I'd like to say bon voyage.
Yes.
Hello, taxidi.
Say that again, Judy?
Hello, taxidi. Same thing.
Bon voyage.
مع السلامة in Arabic.
Ah.
Gary, your turn.
Let's get the hell out of here. I want to go anywhere. I want to go somewhere. Let's all go.
Okay, one last question for everyone. What's your next trip right after this? Right when we can begin really opening up and traveling again. Where's the first place you're going to go?
Oakland.
Mine is to the neighborhood cafe. That's where I would love to be, to have lunch. I haven't been there in a year.
I'll go to Athens and then to Kea. But I would actually like to just go to Boston and go to the Boston Museum or something.
Gary.
Portland Museum of Art.
Oh yeah, clothes.
I want the reverse to happen. I want all sorts of people to come into our bookstore.
Right
I want to be open for the community. Yeah.
I'll go to Gulf of Maine Books and the Portland Museum of Art. Those would be my first 2.
Those sound wonderful. Thank you all. Any last questions from the audience? What a fun night this has been. Boy, I feel like I've gone to a lot of different places. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to remind people to check the Literally Alive page on the Literal Books website for our next show, and which will be in March. And have a wonderful night. Bon voyage.
Bon voyage.
Selamat
Thank
jalan.
you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Kate, can you stay on for a bit?